Hello, and welcome to We Run Over 50, where it's our mission to inspire more people over 50 to become runners over 50. My name is Ernest, and as you might have guessed, I am a runner over 50. If you want to learn more about me and my bona fides when it comes to running, I've included a link to a Get to Know Me video in the description below. The short version is that I've worked in and around the athletic footwear industry for over 2 decades, with most of that time focused on the creation of running shoes. I'm not going to go into that in detail here because I want to get straight into the topic for this video, which is helping runners over 50, and especially new and newish runners over 50, find the right shoe for your needs. So why is this video geared toward newer runners? Well, if you've been running for a while, you probably already have a sense for what does and doesn't work for you. But if you're new to running, or are getting back to it after years, or maybe even after decades away from the sport, the current state of running footwear can be bewildering.
There's a lot of brands, as you can see on this wall.
There's a lot of brands.
It's changed a lot in just the last handful of years. So the purpose of this video is to help you as a new or perhaps even aspiring runner over 50 make sense of the options and find a pair you'll love. That said, of course, anyone is welcome to watch. And if you find this guide helpful, I hope you'll give it a like and pass it along. We also have a Patreon community that's tailored to like-minded people over 50 becoming runners over 50. Our members make these videos possible, and we'd love to have you join us. I also need to make clear that I'm not a doctor, and the content on this channel is for informational and educational purposes only, and does not constitute medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before starting any new fitness program. That's really important. Okay, so coming back to this video, you can certainly watch it straight through from start to finish, but in case you want to jump directly to our recommendations, or refer back to specific sections later on, I've gone ahead and organized it into chapters, any of which you can jump to directly using your video player. Including this introduction, the chapters are our needs as runners over 50. Then we move into our shoe recommendations, starting with a quick primer on how we pick the shoes in this guide, followed by sub-chapters highlighting each of our 4 picks. Next, we share an explanation of why certain shoes with avid followings are not amongst our picks. For anyone inclined to post an all-caps comment flaming me for not including your favorite shoe, I ask that you please watch this chapter first. It's short. And finally, we end with a brief wrap-up. All right, so what are our needs as runners over 50? I think it's important to start by establishing that if anyone has told you that running will, quote unquote, wear out your joints, cause arthritis, or for those who already have arthritis, make it worse, the science is crystal clear. They're dead wrong. Study after high quality study continues to show that recreational running is not associated with an increased risk of knee or hip osteoarthritis, and may actually improve joint health. This myth that running wears out your joints and is consequently bad for people over 50 is so pervasive that I created a video focused specifically on debunking it. I'll include a link to that video in the description. Please give it a watch if you have any misgivings about running as an older adult, and please do share it with anyone who tries to tell you that there's an age limit for running. Now, all that being said, if you are over 50, you don't need me to tell you that your body is different now than it was when you were in your 20s, 30s, or even early 40s. What I'm going to focus on for this video are the 3 changes with the biggest implications for footwear, so that you can find the shoe that's right for who you are today as a person over 50. First, as we age, we lose elasticity in our tendons. And when it comes to running, where this has the biggest implications is our Achilles tendon. The Achilles connects the muscles of our calf to our heel bone and plays a vital role in each and every foot strike. It helps absorb impact as our foot first contacts the ground, helps stabilize the foot while it's on the ground, and throughout this process stretches like a spring or bungee cord, storing energy that's then released as the foot pushes off the ground, significantly amplifying the power and efficiency of our calf muscles. The Achilles is the thickest, strongest tendon in our bodies, and yet it is susceptible to injury. And as we age and our tendons become less elastic, our risk of Achilles injuries rises. In fact, research shows that Achilles tendinopathy, which is chronic pain in the Achilles, is the most common running-related injury experienced by quote-unquote masters runners. For anyone unfamiliar with that term, USA Track and Field classifies anyone 40 and older as a masters runner when it comes to road races. That said, studies suggest that significant declines in physical performance don't really begin to kick in until we hit our 50s. So I think our focus here on people 50 and over is sound. All right, so what does that mean for our footwear choices? Well, when it comes to runners over 50 and keeping our Achilles tendon from becoming our Achilles heel, there are two footwear attributes to pay attention to. Something called the heel ball offset and a feature described as a forefoot rocker. Starting with the heel ball offset, you may have heard this referred to as heel to toe drop or heel drop or even simply drop. I'm going to stick with the industry term of heel ball offset because it more accurately describes the thing we're measuring. As to what that thing is, it's the difference in the thickness of your shoe under the heel of your foot as compared to its thickness under the ball of your foot. I'll use a shoe from Nike called the Vomero Plus to illustrate this. If we were to cut the shoe in half along its length, we'd see the total thickness of its sole under the foot. As you can see here, the sole is actually made up of three components. Right up against the foot is the insole, which is also often referred to as a sock liner. In running shoes, the insole is typically made of a thin layer of soft, lightweight foam and can be removed. In the Vomero Plus, the insole is approximately 4 millimeters thick, which is pretty typical. Beneath the insole is the midsole, which is almost always the thickest part of the sole and the component most responsible for providing cushioning and support. As you can see here in the Vomero Plus in a US men's size 9, the midsole has a heel height of about 36 millimeters and a ball height of about 26 millimeters. Finally, under the midsole is the outsole, which is the component that makes direct contact with the ground. The outsole is primarily responsible for providing traction or grip across a range of surfaces and conditions, and also enhances durability by protecting the midsole from abrasion. In the Vomero Plus, the outsole is roughly 3 millimeters thick. The combination of these three components, the insole, midsole, and outsole, together make up a shoe's total stack height. You can just think of these three layers being stacked one on top of the other. That's what gives you the total height or thickness of the sole under your foot. Here, in the case of the Vomero Plus, in a US men's size 9, the total stack height under the heel of the foot is about 43 millimeters, and the total stack under the ball or forefoot is about 33 millimeters. The difference or offset between those two measures gives us the heel ball offset, which in this case is 10 millimeters. All right, so why does any of this matter to a runner over 50? Well, like I mentioned a minute ago, we lose elasticity in our tendons as we age, and research has shown that older runners are at greater risk of chronic running-related injuries at the Achilles tendon. This suggests that as runners over 50, we're likely to benefit from shoes that reduce the strain on our Achilles. And one way to do that is by wearing a running shoe with a heel ball offset that matches what your body is already accustomed to. A quick sidebar here. For many years, it was accepted that a higher heel ball offset would benefit pretty much anyone with Achilles tendinopathy by limiting stretching the Achilles from mid-stance to toe-off, and thereby reducing the peak force that the Achilles was subjected to. That seems completely logical based on a mechanical model of the ankle, but research with human subjects has highlighted numerous examples of completely contradictory outcomes. In an article published in Lower Extremity Review in 2016, Dr. Karen Silbernagel spoke to this incongruity eloquently when she noted that, and I'm quoting her here, there are very individual responses to shoes and heel lifts, and some people respond totally the opposite of what you expect. So while you may see some folks making the blanket statement that a higher heel ball offset is ipso facto better for older runners, I'd strongly encourage you as a new or relatively new runner over 50 to go with what your body is already accustomed to. If you're not sure what that is, I can tell you that most work shoes, whether you're talking about office shoes, warehouse shoes, or construction boots, feature a heel ball offset in the neighborhood of 10 millimeters. Of course, if you've worn pumps all day for most of your life, you'll be accustomed to a higher offset. On the flip side, if you, say, spent most of your life wearing Birkenstock's classic Arizona sandals, which feature a heel ball offset of 0, you'll be accustomed to a very low offset. But since most of us have spent most of our lives in shoes with a roughly 10 millimeter heel ball offset, I've weighted my recommendations towards shoes in that neighborhood. I also make sure to highlight the heel ball offset for all of the shoes in this guide. Now, one thing I should note is that for over a decade now, really since the publication of a book titled Born to Run by Christopher McDougall, that was published back in 2009, the running footwear industry has slowly but surely been moving toward lower heel ball offsets. The rationale that's often given is that when we're barefoot, the heel and ball of the foot are both in direct contact with the ground, so our natural state is a heel ball offset of 0. That's inarguably true, but as I mentioned earlier, most of us have spent most of our lives wearing shoes that do feature a heel ball offset, typically of 10 millimeters or higher. So while a lower offset is more natural, it isn't necessarily what's normal for most of us. And if you're over 50, you've spent a lot of years getting normalized to a particular offset. This is why I encourage you to ignore the dogma you might encounter in running circles about heel ball offsets. Many running influencers out there will insist that the lower heel ball offset is universally better. Meanwhile, there are experts out there who will insist that for older runners, a higher heel ball offset is universally better, regardless of what your body is normalized to. My advice is to tune out that noise, and when it comes to the heel ball offset, listen to your body and let it be your guide. Now, that said, because of that inexorable march toward lower offsets that I mentioned a minute ago, it's tough these days to find a good running shoe with a heel ball offset higher than 10 millimeters. Consequently, 10 millimeters is the highest offset you'll see amongst the shoes in our guide. If you need an offset higher than that, I think your best bet is going to be the addition of a heel lift. That's outside the scope of this episode, but if there's interest, I can create a follow-up focused on inserts and orthotics for runners over 50. Please let me know in the comments. All right, so that's heel ball offsets. In a nutshell, we lose elasticity in our tendons as we age, and consequently, Achilles tendinopathy is the most common running-related injury experienced by masters runners. A shoe's heel ball offset can play a role in reducing Achilles strain, but there is no universally optimal offset for runners over 50. Instead, when it comes to the heel ball offset, my advice is to seek out running shoes with an offset similar to what your body is already accustomed to. Hopefully that's clear, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them in the comments, and I'll reply to as many as I can. Now, I also mentioned the feature that's often referred to as a forefoot rocker. All right, so what's that? Well, this one's actually pretty straightforward. A forefoot rocker is a pronounced curvature along the frontmost part of a shoe's sole when viewed from the side. Running shoe midsoles have always featured some amount of curvature under the forefoot. As you can see here, the midsole of this Brooks Adrenaline GTS 6 from way back in 2006 tapers as it extends from under the ball of the foot to the frontmost tip of the toe box. Back then, we called this toe spring, which technically is a misnomer, but that's another story for another day. The key point here is that we took a flat shape and slightly sprung it upward to promote a smooth toe off and to keep the frontmost edge of the sole from catching the ground when your leg swings forward. But the rise of Hoka in the early 2010s literally changed the language around this feature. Their first shoe, the Mafate, which was actually introduced in 2009, you're seeing a prototype of it here, It sparked the era of maximal cushioning that we're still living in. The Mafate was insanely tall by the standards of the day, and with that height and associated inflexibility came the need for exaggerated bevels at both the forefoot and heel. The shoe simply wouldn't have been runnable without them. The result was a midsole that wasn't just slightly sprung under the toes. Instead, it featured a continuous curve from heel to toe, reminiscent of the curved rockers at the base of a rocking chair. Now, there's no hard and fast rule in the running shoe industry as to what constitutes toe spring versus a forefoot rocker. It's just sort of one of those I know when I see it situations. But my rule of thumb is if a shoe features a midsole stack height at the ball of the foot of 30 millimeters or taller, which is becoming more and more common, it must incorporate a pronounced forefoot rocker. If not, the shoe will excessively strain your Achilles and calf through the transition from mid-stance when your foot is flat on the ground to toe off. What's exciting is that research has shown that shoes with pronounced forefoot rockers can actually reduce the strain on your Achilles and calf. And given the increased risk of injury to the Achilles amongst us older runners, the forefoot rocker is another attribute I make sure to highlight for all the shoes in this guide. One quick side note, in my own experience, I've found that an effective rocker can also enable you to tolerate a lower heel ball offset. For example, whereas the offset I'm accustomed to is 8 to 10 millimeters, I've found that I'm able to run pain and injury free in shoes with heel ball offsets as low as 4 to 5 millimeters, so long as those shoes incorporate a pronounced forefoot rocker. I thought this was worth highlighting as a caveat to my advice on heel ball offsets, and it's something you'll hear me comment on for one of the shoes in this guide. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when it comes to running, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I just noted a minute ago that shoes with pronounced forefoot rockers can reduce the strain on your Achilles and calf. But those forces don't just disappear into thin air. Instead, they're shifted to other parts of your body. And the research suggests that when it comes to forefoot rockers, the workload that's shifted away from your Achilles and calf is shifted to your knees and hips. But given the real-world data on the increased risk of Achilles injuries in older runners, I think the benefits associated with forefoot rockers represent a worthwhile trade-off, especially if you're a new or relatively new runner over 50. All right, now let's move on to the second of the 3 footwear-related changes we experience as people over 50. And this set of changes is rooted in cushioning. You may not realize this, but we're all born with a cushioning system built right into the bottoms of our feet. It's called the plantar fat pad, or plantar is simply another word for the sole of the foot. Sometimes it's referred to as the heel fat pad, but the pads exist under both the heel and ball of the foot. And as the name suggests, the pads are made up of fat cells that are contained within a lattice of collagen and elastin. Research has shown that the plantar fat pad continues to thicken all the way through our 30s, and in some cases even into our early 40s. But by our mid-40s, it begins to atrophy and thin out. Combined with the loss of elasticity in our tendons that we talked about in the previous chapter, this means that our overall capacity to absorb shock diminishes as we get into our late 40s and early 50s. As a consequence, it's broadly accepted that older runners can benefit from shoes that offer a high degree of shock absorption. Now, this might lead you to assume that as a person over 50, you should snag the tallest, softest shoe you can find. But there is a mitigating factor here, and it's the fact that another system that begins to decline as we enter our 50s is our sense of balance. There are a range of reasons for this, that loss of elasticity in our joints that I just mentioned, age-related loss of muscle mass, the natural degradation of our vestibular system, and so on. Why I'm raising this here is that a critical consequence of this decline in balance is an increased risk of falls. Historically, fall prevention has been focused on the elderly, which refers specifically to people 65 and older. But a study published out of the University of North Carolina in 2018 found that the risk of falls requiring trips to the ER really begins to increase as early as age 45 for women. This led the authors to conclude that waiting until age 60 or 65 to screen for fall risk is too late for women, and that screening and intervention should begin as early as age 45. So increased fall risk isn't just an issue for the elderly. The great news here is that physical activity, including running, has been shown to significantly reduce the risk of falls in older adults. But we can't escape the laws of physics, which tell us that all other things being equal, a shoe that's both very tall and very soft will be less stable and thereby increase fall risk. A study conducted by a group out of the UAE and published in 2024 looked at this and concluded that a heel height of less than or equal to 4 centimeters, which equates to 40 millimeters, is a reasonable threshold for maintaining balance and stability, thereby mitigating the associated risk of falls. I think their 40 millimeter threshold for heel height is a good benchmark. But given that people are in different places when it comes to concerns around balance, I didn't make it a hard and fast cutoff for the shoes in our guide. That said, there's only one shoe I recommend that exceeds that threshold, and I do make sure to highlight heel height across the board. All right, there's just one last thing I need to mention in this chapter. As you may have noticed, that study on fall risk out of the University of North Carolina noted specifically that the risk of falls requiring trips to the ER begins earlier for women. In the case of men, they didn't see a similar increase until 65. And you remember that issue with the plantar fat pad beginning to atrophy as we hit our mid-40s? Well, the research shows that that's the case across genders, but as compared to men, women have been found to have a thinner plantar fat pad under the heel across all life stages. So for women, when that heel fat pad begins to atrophy, it's starting from a thinner point. And as a consequence, women may experience this loss of the body's natural cushioning under the heel more rapidly and more acutely than men. Finally, research tells us that men are, on average, heavier than women. In the US, for example, data from the CDC shows that the average US man is about 14% heavier than the average US woman. That's a significant difference. But what does that have to do with shoes? Well, it tells us that on average, a woman is going to have significantly less mass with which to compress the soles of her shoes. So whereas a given shoe might feel nice and soft to a guy, that same shoe might feel firm to a woman because she simply doesn't weigh enough to even begin to engage its cushioning. There have been sporadic attempts by brands to offer gender-specific midsole harnesses, where the women's version of a given model would be softer than the men's. But that sort of gender specificity has largely fallen by the wayside. So what does all this mean? Well, in a nutshell, research suggests that runners over 50 can benefit from shoes that offer a high degree of shock absorption. But because we also start to experience declines in balance in our 50s, we should avoid shoes with midsoles that are so tall that they heighten our risk of falls. A general guideline here is to look for a sole with a heel no taller than 40 millimeters, though this is a recommendation and not a rule. Finally, this need for increased cushioning without an associated increase in fall risk is even more pressing for women over 50. All right, now on to the third and final collection of changes we experience as people over 50 and how those changes can inform our footwear choices. This set is rooted in the various and sundry injuries and conditions we accumulate over the decades. And since the topic of this episode is shoes, we're going to focus on the foot, specifically the shape of the foot. As I'm guessing many of you have already recognized, as we reach middle age, for a range of reasons, our feet tend to get longer, wider, and flatter. By this point in our lives, a fair few of us are also battling bunions. While bunions are not gender specific, research has shown that women are far more likely to develop bunions than men. Sorry, ladies, I know I'm sharing a lot of bad news in this video, but like the issues I highlighted in the previous section, bunions and these other changes in foot shape are not showstoppers when it comes to running. They can be addressed or at the very least mitigated, and the right shoe can absolutely make a difference. But before we even get to shoes, it's a really good idea to get your feet measured for length and width, even and perhaps especially if you've worn the same shoe size for decades. Here, you can see a customer getting her feet sized at a shop called Runner's Edge in Farmingdale, New York. I recommend going to a local running store like Runner's Edge to have this done because odds are the staff there are going to be a lot more diligent about this process than the staff at a big box shoe retailer that doesn't specialize in running. And the way this store associate is measuring their customer shoe size is spot on. You want to measure your foot while it's bearing weight and in the sort of sock you'll be wearing while running, because the thickness of your sock can absolutely influence the way your shoe fits. I'll create an episode focused specifically on socks down the road, but in the interest of time, I'll just say for now that I strongly recommend getting a few pairs of socks created specifically for running and avoiding models marketed as providing added cushioning. Instead, look for words like light, lightweight, or ultralight in the name of the sock. Those are clear indicators that the sock will be thin enough that it won't mute the sensory feedback to your foot, which can help mitigate that decline in balance I touched on in the previous chapter. This combination of a thin running sock with a good modern running shoe will provide you with the best blend of cushioning, comfort, and sensory feedback. Oh, and you'll be able to find good running socks at the same running store where you get your feet measured. Now, once you've had your feet measured, start with that size as your shoe size. That might sound patently obvious, but there is a school of thought that insists that everyone should, by default, get their running shoes a half or even a full size larger than their measured size. There are many rationales offered, like the fact that our feet swell when we run, or that we need extra room up front to keep our toes from smashing up against the front of the shoe. But what I can tell you is that running shoes today are designed and engineered to account for those issues. So if your foot measures as, let's say, US men's size 9 and a D width, at the very least, start by trying on shoes that are US men's size 9 and a D width, where D represents the regular or medium width in men's sizes. If that feels too tight, then go up a half size or up a width. There is variability in sizing from brand to brand and model to model within a brand, so don't be surprised if you need to try the same shoe in a few different sizes to get the fit that's right for you. But please ignore this notion that you should always go for running shoes that are a half or full size larger than your measured size. Wearing a shoe that's too large can cause as many issues as wearing a shoe that's too small. All right, so you've had your feet sized and you're going to use that size as your starting point for trying on shoes. This might sound patently obvious again, but if you find that your feet have gotten significantly wider due to aging or bunions, seek out shoes that are offered in widths. All of the shoes in our guide are available in at least one additional width above and beyond the regular medium width. Now, another issue that many people face when they get into their 50s is arthritis in the primary joint of the big toe, which is also referred to as hallux rigidus. This can lead to pain, swelling, and stiffness in that joint, and you should absolutely see your healthcare provider if you start to experience these symptoms. The good news is research has shown that exercise can actually help slow the progression of hallux rigidus, but running in a standard shoe may be painful. If so, a wider shoe can help here as well, even if your foot doesn't necessarily measure as wide or extra wide. In addition, a shoe with a sole that's less flexible under the ball of your foot can help sidestep discomfort by limiting how much your big toe has to flex. I've included 3 shoes in our guide that deliver on these points, and I speak to their suitability for folks with big toe stiffness in the chapters highlighting each of our picks. Finally, when it comes to foot shape, as I mentioned a minute ago, our feet tend to get longer, wider, and also flatter as we age. For several decades, the running footwear industrial complex told people that if you have a flat foot, you have to wear a specific type of shoe called a stability or motion control shoe that would buttress your arch with a chunk of stiff, uncompressible foam. That Brooks Adrenaline GTS from 2006 that I showed you earlier is a great example of a classic stability shoe. If you look at its midsole along the arch or medial side of the shoe, you'll notice a chunk of gray foam that extends under the arch. This foam is rock hard. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. but it's much harder than the white foam adjacent to it. And it's further reinforced with a plastic component that adds even more rigidity. All of this structure was intended to prevent or block your arch from collapsing, which we in the industry would believe was crucial because we associated the collapse of the arch with something called overpronation. Now, pronation is a remarkable triplanar motion, but we were fixated on just one aspect of it, which was the inward rolling of the foot relative to the ankle. Let me demonstrate this for you. Let's imagine that this depth gauge is the ankle, and this is the arch side of the shoe. The inward rolling of the foot relative to the ankle is the aspect of pronation we were fixated with. It's important to note here that pronation is natural and a vital part of the way our bodies have evolved to absorb impact when walking and running. But the running industry had convinced itself that overpronation, that motion, was the cause of essentially all chronic running-related injuries. And this was based on science in the form of mechanical models of the body and cadaver studies. So if you had a flat arch, which we conflated with overpronation and injuries, you'd be put into a stability shoe like the Brooks Adrenaline or a motion control shoe, which was even stiffer and clunkier than a stability shoe. And this was the way of things, pretty much from the early 80s through the mid-2010s. But then a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. As researchers started to conduct running injury studies with actual live humans, they found over and over again that this overpronation paradigm for running injuries didn't hold water. For example, one major study published in 2010 found that assigning running shoes based on the height of your arch had very little influence on injury outcomes. Another, published in 2011, found that runners who exhibited a pronated foot posture actually experienced more pain when running in a stability shoe as compared to a quote-unquote neutral shoe, which is a shoe without those stiffening components along the arch. The same study found that regardless of arch profile or the degree of pronation exhibited, all runners reported more pain and had a higher risk of injury when running in a motion control shoe. And these are just two examples. There are many others. The bottom line is that by the mid-2010s, it was clear that the industry's fixation on overpronation was misguided, and that a flatter arch didn't mean that you needed a stiffer, more controlling shoe. As a consequence, over the past 7 years or so, traditional stability and motion control shoes have all but disappeared. The established brands like ASICS, Brooks, and Nike all still offer models categorized under terms like stability, supportive, and structured, but with very few exceptions, those shoes no longer incorporate stiffening components intended to control the arch. On the whole, the industry has shifted away from the idea that shoes should control the way that you run based on a predetermined universal ideal, and to the philosophy that shoes should allow you as an individual to run the way your body wants to run. Studies, including studies that I've been lucky enough to have been directly involved in, have shown that shoes built on this new paradigm can significantly reduce your risk of chronic running-related injuries. That's why all of the shoes in our guide reflect this new approach, and I'll speak to how this comes to life in each of our picks when we get to those chapters. So to sum up, because our feet get longer, wider, and flatter as we age, before buying a new pair of running shoes, it's a good idea to get your feet measured for length and width, ideally at a local running store. And pick up some thin running socks while you're at it. They'll boost sensory feedback and can help mitigate age-related declines in our sense of balance. Then, when you're trying on shoes, start with your measured shoe size. Don't default to a half or full size up. And be open to some trial and error to find the fit that's right for you. It's also important to note that wide footers need not despair. Many great running shoes are now offered in multiple widths. Another common foot issue for people over 50 is arthritis in the joint at the base of the big toe. Exercise has been shown to help manage this, but if you're dealing with big toe stiffness, consider a shoe with a wide upper and a rockered midsole that's stiff under the ball of the foot. Finally, a flat arch does not mean you need a clunky, controlling shoe. In fact, research has shown that the shoe that feels most comfortable to you while running is the shoe that's most likely to reduce your risk of chronic running-related injuries. So trust what your body tells you while you're trying on shoes. All right, as long as it was not even close to a comprehensive catalog of the changes we experience as people over 50. But I did my best to at least cover the main points that I wish someone had told me when I returned to running as a 51-year-old. Now, with this foundation established, let's get to our running shoe picks for runners over 50. Over the past year, I've been lucky enough to have had the opportunity to run in a lot of shoes, from the most advanced featherweight marathon racers to beefy, mileage-guzzling bruisers, and a whole lot in between. For this guide, I looked back at all of them, over 30 models from 10 different brands, and evaluated them through 3 filters. First were the changes we experienced as runners over 50, the things we discussed in the previous chapters. Any shoes that failed to accommodate the reduced elasticity in our tendons, our need for increased cushioning set against our diminished sense of balance, and our changing feet were knocked out of contention straight away. The next filter was versatility. As I mentioned at the outset, this video is primarily geared to new and newish runners over 50. And if you're a new runner, you're probably not interested in splashing out on a whole set of shoes, each with a narrow, highly specialized purpose. Instead, what I've heard from most new runners is a desire for one shoe that's going to serve your needs and last through this first phase of your running journey. In running industry parlance, these sorts of versatile, durable running shoes are called daily trainers because they have the range to take on most all of the runs that most people will do on a regular basis. If a shoe didn't pass muster as a daily trainer, it was dropped from consideration. The last filter was broad availability in physical retail stores. As I suggested earlier, I think it's vitally important for new runners to have your feet measured, ideally at a local running store, and to then try on a lot of different shoes to get to that one shoe that really works for you. While many online retailers these days offer generous return policies, there's no substitute for going to a store and trying on a mess of shoes, potentially even the same model in a range of different sizes and widths. So even if a shoe had passed the 2 previous filters, if it wasn't broadly available in physical stores across the US, I crossed it off our list of contenders. And that exercise left us with 4 recommended daily trainers for runners over 50. As to how I tested these shoes, I logged at least 30 miles in each of our recommended models across 4 or more runs, typically over the span of a week to a week and a half. At least one of those runs was 10 miles or farther and lasted for an hour or longer. I wanted to make sure I logged a reasonable distance and a reasonable amount of time on feet in each shoe. Finally, to gauge their versatility, I used all of the shoes in this guide across a range of run types, from slow, easy runs to faster speed training sessions. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that I hope you'll view our recommendations as starting points rather than endpoints. My intention is not to have you go to your local running store and say, I just want to try these 4 shoes like you have blinders on. Instead, pick the 1 or 2 models out of our recommendations that seem to best align to your needs and preferences and start there. If at all possible, take them for a brief jog. Most running stores will be happy to let you do that. Or we'll have a treadmill in the shop so you can give them a go indoors. Consider how you feel about those shoes and share your thoughts with the store associate. It's more than likely they'll be able to suggest 2 or 3 additional models worth trying. And that could lead you to an even better match for your needs. As I mentioned a minute ago, this guide highlights 4 picks. And those 4 shoes aren't ranked. They're all We Run Over 50 recommended models. Yet each is distinct and is going to work best for different kinds of runners. That left me thinking about how to organize this guide so that you could quickly zero in on the shoe or shoes that best align to your priorities. What I ultimately decided was to present our recommendations on a spectrum of familiarity. I'm going to start with the shoe that I believe runners over 50 will find the most familiar, meaning the one that reminds you of that running shoe you wore when you were in your 20s or 30s. And then I'm going to work my way up to the shoe that will feel the least familiar. But remember, all of these shoes are recommended. This spectrum is just another data point that's meant to help you decide which shoe or shoes will best match your needs. And finally, speaking of data points, I'm not going to go through an exhaustive rundown of specs for each of our recommended shoes. I will absolutely speak to how each model delivers on the needs of runners over 50, but I find lists of specifications terribly boring and not particularly useful. For anyone who does want to see all the specs, I've included links in the description to product pages for each of our recommended shoes at a site called Running Warehouse. I have absolutely no relationship with Running Warehouse, and I bought all of the shoes I've tested over the past year with my own money. So there are no backdoor financial dealings going on here. The reason I like Running Warehouse as a reference is that they measure all of their shoes themselves. They don't just list the specs provided by the manufacturers. And they measure all of their shoes across brands in the same US Men's 9 for men's models and US Women's 8 for women's models. This means that when you compare the specs of shoes from different brands at Running Warehouse, you're seeing an apples to apples comparison based on the same standardized size. So that's why I'm linking to their product pages. All right, with all that context out of the way, let's get to our picks. Starting with the Brooks Ghost 17, which retails for $150 US. In one sentence, the Ghost 17 is the versatility champ. As I mentioned in the last chapter, where I explained how we selected our recommended shoes, versatility was a key criterion. And by versatility, I meant a shoe with the range to take on most all the types of runs that most people will do on a regular basis. Well, from roads to light trails, the Ghost 17 absolutely delivers on this front. But what makes it the versatility champ is that more than any of the other recommended shoes in this guide, the Ghost 17 will serve you as well for gym workouts as it does on the run. My sister, who's in her late 50s, has for several years now relied on the Brooks Ghost for her Orange Theory classes because it so adeptly handles the blend of running and functional strength training that underpins those workouts. But let's start with what makes the Ghost 17 the most familiar shoe in this guide, beginning with the midsole, where the shoe offers what is by today's standards a classic heel ball offset of 10 millimeters. Historically, the Ghost has always featured a 12 millimeter heel ball offset, but Brooks faced a growing chorus of critiques in recent years that was too tall and old school. So they brought it down just a scooch to 10 millimeters. And that's still the highest offset in this guide, tied with just one other shoe. Crucially, this relatively high offset is balanced by a moderate forefoot rocker, so you'll get a smooth toe off without feeling like you're constantly up on your tiptoes. I would say that if your body is accustomed to a higher offset and you, in general, prefer a more familiar feel on their foot, the Ghost 17 is going to be a great choice. Now, sticking with the midsole, but moving on to cushioning, I would describe the Ghost as relatively firm. That's partly down to the fact that it features the lowest midsole stack height of any shoe in this guide, under both the heel and forefoot. And I have to admit that through my first run in the shoe, which was a 12-mile long run, I found its midsole overly firm and lacking any perceptible responsiveness. It just didn't give me anything back. But then on my second run, which was an easy run at a much shorter distance of 5 miles, I was pleasantly surprised to find that the Ghost 17 felt like a different shoe. Still by no means pillowy, but significantly softer, more responsive, and I guess I'd say just more fun underfoot. And fortunately, it's this more fun version of the shoe that persisted across the remainder of my runs, which included a couple of faster paced sessions. And I should note that even as the shoe became perceptibly softer, I didn't feel an associated decline in stability. So when it comes to our increased need for cushioning as runners over 50, the Go 17 is going to be a good choice for folks who prefer a relatively firm feel underfoot and or those who have enough mass to really engage the shoe's midsole. My sense is that in general, lighter runners may not get as much out of the ride experience. If use in the gym is important to you, the relative firmness of the Ghost midsole, along with its excellent side-to-side stability, are going to make it a good choice. And speaking of stability, the Ghost 17 is also going to be a good choice if reducing fall risk is a priority. Now, moving on to fit, this is where Brooks typically shines, and the Ghost 17 is no exception. While Brooks isn't nearly as ubiquitous as Nike or Adidas, the brand has dominated sales at running specialty stores across the US for decades, and that popularity is rooted in their consistently exceptional fit. No one bats 1,000, but when it comes to fit, Brooks gets closer than any other brand in the industry. And this is another area where I think the Ghost 17 is going to feel more familiar to new runners over 50 than any of the other shoes in this guide. But I need to acknowledge a huge caveat here, which is that shoe fit is effectively impossible to critique because it's fundamentally subjective. In fact, multiple studies have shown that there's little to no correlation between the shape of a person's foot and their preferred shoe fit. For example, a study published in 2020 out of South Korea found that people with wider feet tend to wear tighter shoes and people with narrower feet prefer to wear looser shoes. As wacky as that may seem, I can tell you that these findings are not an aberration. Our perception of fit is based on our subjective life experience rather than the objective, quantifiable shape of our feet. For example, someone who grew up playing soccer where it's the norm to wear tightly fitting shoes will, as an adult, very likely show a preference for shoes that are, by all quantifiable measures, too narrow for their feet. But that tight fit is what they've become conditioned to prefer. This tendency toward paradoxical preference is why I don't think there's much value in me spending a whole lot of time talking about fit. But from the perspective of our overarching fit needs as runners over 50, I can tell you that the Ghost 17 brings the goods. For one thing, it's offered in as many as 4 width options in select colorways for men and women, specifically narrow, medium, wide, and extra wide. That's more width options than any other shoe in this guide. So even if you have an issue like bunions, you should be able to find the Ghost 17 in a size and width that works for you. In the chapters on our needs as runners over 50, I also talked about the fact that our feet tend to get flatter as we age. And here too, the Ghost 17 delivers, with a sole platform that extends along the arch to provide support throughout foot strike without any added stiffening structures intended to, scare quotes, control your gait. This sort of filled-in arch design is becoming much more popular across the running footwear industry because it offers a level of support that works for a lot of runners without limiting the freedom to move the way your body wants to move. Consequently, this isn't the last time you're going to see this design approach in this guide. Now, by contrast, historically, a lot of running shoes featured what's often described as a wasted midfoot design. And you can see an example of that here in the Adidas Adizero Evo SL. And if you look at its midsole, you can see how it narrows along both sides of the midfoot, like a waist. And it's actually concave under the arch, which could exaggerate the innate tendency of a given wearer's arch to collapse. Now, if you compare that to the sole of the Brooks Ghost 17, you can see that the Ghost 17's midsole does exhibit some wasting through the midfoot, but remains much wider than the Evo SL. And importantly, the sole of the Ghost 17 is flat and maintains contact with the ground under the arch, again, to provide support without overly controlling your gait. Now, that said, if you were to find that the Ghost 17 doesn't offer quite as much support as you need, don't dismiss it straight away because it's a particularly good platform for over-the-counter or prescription orthotics. That's partly due to the relatively firm, stable base I highlighted a minute ago, But another factor here is the Ghost 17's removable insole or sock liner, which is roughly 30% thicker than average. This is a boon for orthotic wearers because those devices are almost always thicker than the sock liner that comes with your shoe. As a consequence, when you replace that stock sock liner with your thicker orthotic, the fit of your shoe will become much tighter because the orthotic is taking up more of the interior volume of the shoe. In the case of the Ghost 17, however, because its upper is already engineered around a thicker sock liner, it'll accommodate a wide range of aftermarket orthotics with little to no impact on fit. Now, the last thing I'll comment on is value. At a suggested retail price of $150 in the US, the Ghost 17 is the second least expensive shoe in this guide. I should note that the asking price is $10 higher than it was for last year's Ghost 16, which is something many longtime Ghost wearers aren't too happy about. I suspect this price rise may be due at least in part to the current tariff situation. But my take is that even at $150, the Ghost 17 represents good value for runners over 50. If you're seeking a shoe with a relatively firm platform that's inherently stable, in part because it isn't too tall, a heel ball offset of 10 millimeters, which is what many of us older runners have become normalized to, a fit offered in as many as 4 widths, and with the interior volume to accommodate aftermarket orthotics. If those are the features that matter to you, I haven't come across anything that beats the Brooks Ghost 17. Add on the versatility to tackle a range of runs, as well as workouts in the gym, and I think you've got a heck of a value proposition. The one issue of interest to some older runners that I would say the shoe doesn't address is big toe stiffness or hallux rigidus. I say this because the Ghost 17 is on the flexible side for a contemporary running shoe, and that flex could exacerbate discomfort for those with hallux rigidus. Also, as I mentioned earlier, lighter runners may not have enough mass to really engage the Ghost 17's midsole. But for most everyone else, I'm crowning the Ghost 17 as the versatility champ. And that takes us to the Hoka Mach 6, which retails for $140 US. In one sentence, the Mach 6 is the Mazda Miata of running shoes. An absolute blast on the road that's somehow also safe, reliable, and affordable. Before diving into my review, I should note that an update to the Mach 6 is imminent. I'm recording this in late February, and the new Hoka Mach 7 is set to be available at the very beginning of March. Its release is so close at hand that a handful of running shoe tubers have already published reviews, and the consensus is that the new Mach 7 is an incremental, largely cosmetic update. And given how excellent the Mach 6 has proven to be, I think that's a great thing. The lack of any major updates to the 7 also means that the Mach 6, which is now heavily discounted, is an even better buy. I'll make sure to follow up this episode with a look at the new Mach 7 down the road, but unless you love the look of that new shoe, I'd encourage you to seek out the old Mach 6 while it's still available. Alright, so what makes the Mach 6 so great? For me, it starts on the scale, where the Mach 6 weighs in at a very light 8.3 ounces in US men's 9 and 6.9 ounces in US women's 8. That's 16% lighter than the next lightest shoe in this guide. Now, typically, shoes in this weight class lack the robustness and durability you'd want from a daily trainer, to which the Mach 6 coolie says, one of the ways the Mach 6 manages to be so svelte is that it features a relatively low midsole by Hoka standards. With a heel stack of 37 millimeters, the Mach 6 is just 1 millimeter taller than the Brooks Ghost 17. Now, 37 millimeters a stack at the heel but is by no means low, but when compared to Hoka's best known models like the Clifton and Bondi, both of which feature heel stacks well in excess of 40 millimeters, the Mach 6 feels like a low-slung sports car. But you may ask, how does it also manage to deliver on the durability you expect from a daily trainer? Well, one key here is that while the Mach 6 is just 1 millimeter taller than the Ghost 17 under the heel, it offers 6 more millimeters of foam under the ball of the foot, where you actually experience greater loads during foot strike. Okay, 1 millimeter taller at the heel, but 6 millimeters taller at the ball. The math isn't mathing, right? Well, the way Hoka achieves this is by architecting the midsole of the Mach 6 with a heel ball offset of just 5 millimeters, which is by far the lowest offset in this guide. As I noted in the chapter on the loss of elasticity in our tendons, in theory, this could increase the strain on your Achilles tendon and calf. But Hoka mitigates this risk with a pronounced forefoot rocker that begins its upward arc under the ball of the foot. This is described as an early stage rocker because it begins to take effect earlier in foot strike than a rocker that starts further forward under the toes. Research has shown that this sort of early stage rocker can reduce Achilles tendon forces through toe off, and that was very much my experience when running in the Mach 6. As I mentioned earlier, I typically prefer shoes with a heel ball offset in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 millimeters. So I was more than a little apprehensive about the Mach 6 and its 5 millimeter offset. But once I started running, the shoe just felt natural, smooth, and fast. So even if you don't typically prefer a shoe with a low offset, I think the Hoka Mach 6 is worth a try, particularly if you place a premium on lightweight and want as much cushioning as possible under the ball of your foot. Now, speaking of cushioning, I was really impressed by the foam that makes up the midsole of the Mach 6. It's based on a material called EVA, which has been the industry standard for decades. Over the past several years, though, EVA has been supplanted by higher performance foams, and I had seen some critiques of Hoka for sticking with boring old EVA. Well, I can tell you that the foam in the Mach 6 is not your mother's or father's EVA. It's soft, springy, lightweight, and durable. As I mentioned a minute ago, you also get a lot of it, especially under the ball of your foot. And yet, the shoe still comes in below that 40 millimeter threshold for maintaining balance and stability. The footprint of the Mach 6 is also relatively wide, so I think it's a good choice for folks with a focus on balance. Okay, that brings us to fit, which is the one area where the Mach 6 may be problematic for some. I know I mentioned during my review of the Ghost 17 that due to the fundamental subjectivity of fit, there isn't much value in spending a whole lot of time talking about it. But in the case of the Mach 6, my fit issue was so pronounced that I think it's essential to highlight. In short, I found the shoe almost comically narrow. Fortunately, the Mach 6 is offered in both medium, which Hoka calls regular, and wide. For a variety of reasons, I had to buy my pair of the Mach 6 online, and I ordered them in regular because I wear everything in regular. But the Mach 6 in its regular width fit me like a narrow, and a tight narrow at that. After my first run in the shoe, I thought I might not be able to wear it again. But I tried what's known as the skip eyelet lacing technique, which you're seeing here, and that helped immensely. So much so that I've now logged over 54 miles in the shoe across 8 runs. Still, I would strongly recommend that anyone with even a slightly wide foot consider the Mach 6 in wide. And if at all possible, don't do as I did. Go to your local running store and try the shoe on before you buy it. One quick sidebar, I'll include a link in the description to a video from a phenomenal channel called Doctors of Running that offers more detail on how to apply the skip eyelet lacing technique. It can be a real foot saver. The last thing I'll touch on in terms of fit is arch feel. And here the Mach 6 is very similar to the Brooks Go 17. Like the Go 17, the sole of the Mach 6 remains wide through the midfoot. There's minimal wasting. It also remains flat under the arch with no added stiffening structures. And the net effect is a smooth, naturally supportive feel from initial contact through mid-stance and toe off. All right, to sum up, the Hoka Mach 6 does feature a low heel ball offset, but that's mitigated by a pronounced early stage rocker. As I mentioned, my Achilles typically do better in shoes with a moderate to high offset, but I had no issues logging big miles in the Mach 6. Its cushioning is in that smile-inducing zone that blends soft protection with springy response. while its relatively wide base offers a degree of stability that inspires confidence, even though the midsole of the Mach 6 is tall. I think light runners in particular will love the ride of the Mach 6. Fit is the one attribute that's not a home run, with the upper running very narrow in Hoka's regular width. Fortunately, the shoe is offered in wide, but expect that to fit more like a medium from other brands. You can use techniques like skip outlet lacing to mitigate tightness across the ball of your foot and instep, but I wouldn't recommend the Mach 6 to anyone with bunions. On the topic of foot issues, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on hallux rigidus, because I think the Mach 6 could be a good choice for folks with big toe stiffness, so long as its fit isn't too tight for you. I say this because its tall forefoot stack and early stage rocker effectively limit flex up front. Finally, when it comes to value, so long as the Mach 6 fits, I think it's a great deal at its MSRP of $140 and a screamer of a deal at its current markdown pricing. It feels fast but also protective, soft but also responsive, and nimble while always remaining under control. That's why I'm calling the Hoka Mach 6 the Mazda Miata of running shoes. An absolute blast on the road that's somehow also safe, reliable, and affordable. All right, let's move on to the ASICS GEL-Kayano 32, which retails for $165. In one sentence, the Kayano 32 is like Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. Seemingly stodgy at first glance, but beneath the surface, a devoted protector who contains multitudes. On that point about seeming stodgy, as its name indicates, the Kayano has existed across 32 incarnations. That's well over a century in footwear years, and few other shoes in the industry come even close to matching its staying power. Yet I've never really been a fan of the Kayano. Historically, it's always represented that overly controlling approach to foot strike management that I touched on in earlier chapters. For example, here's an original GEL-Kayano 16, which was introduced back in late 2009. Along the medial arch side here, you can see a staple feature of the Kayano since its inception, a chunk of hard gray foam under the arch, which is called a medial post. As I explained earlier, this medial post is significantly harder than the white foam around it, and was meant to buttress or stabilize the arch, thereby preventing overpronation or the excessive inward rolling of the foot. This stabilization of the arch is why shoes like the Kayano were called stability shoes. And that hard foam under the arch did effectively reduce the degree to which anyone wearing the shoe could pronate. With that blocking of pronation, though, came a clunky, stiff, and generally unenjoyable ride. Many runners accepted that as the price we had to pay to run without injury, but then large-scale injury studies began to reveal that shoes like the Kayano, that were engineered to limit pronation, could actually increase the risk of chronic running-related injuries. For an industry that had convinced itself that overpronation was the root of all evil, these were earth-shattering revelations. But as the science became irrefutable, the footwear brands gradually let go of the idea that shoes should control the way you run based on a predetermined universal ideal, and shifted to the philosophy that shoes should allow you as an individual to run the way your body wants to run. At the same time, it was also recognized that a shoe should not exaggerate your innate pronation or overarching way of moving. So don't try to control to some universal ideal, and don't exaggerate the innate motions of the foot. Well, some brands got on this train earlier than others, and ASICS was pretty late to the party. All the way through version 29, the Kayano continued to incorporate stiffening components intended to block pronation.
It's a complete redesign of the ASICS GEL-Kayano 29. Let's run with it. And because this is a dual density midsole, we also have something called light truss, which is a more dense, more stable foam that wraps from the medial side and a little bit on the lateral side. Now this essentially acts as a posting mechanism where it keeps your foot from rolling to the inside.
It's these generations of the shoe that had defined the franchise in my mind, and that's why I wasn't all that keen on reviewing the Kayano 32. What I didn't realize, though, is that ASICS had completely revolutionized the Kayano starting with version 30 a couple years back. And once I, like Elizabeth Bennett, let go of my prejudice toward the franchise, my feelings for the 32 transformed into admiration and eventually love.
You're too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are what they were last April, tell me so at once.
My feelings are so different. In fact, they are quite the opposite.
At the heart of this transformation is something ASICS calls the 4D guidance system. As the company describes it, instead of bracing the feet to restrict movement, the 4D guidance system features an integrated design that works with the movement of the body to continue providing optimum stability and enhanced comfort when a runner needs it most. So a complete 180 from the classic control-based approach that had underpinned the Kayano through 29 generations. And the result is a shoe that's a great choice for runners over 50. Let's start with the heel ball offset, where this is the first Kayano to drop down to an 8mm offset after sticking to 10mm for the entirety of its existence up till now. I should note that there was a stretch where the women's Kayano featured a 13mm offset, based on research showing that women better tolerate higher offsets, but that was fairly short-lived. So why go down to an 8mm offset? Now, remember when I said earlier that you should stick with the offset that your body has become normalized to? That absolutely remains true, but it's also true that shoes with a lower heel ball offset can promote an inherently flatter foot strike. There's a whole lot of noise around one type of foot strike being better than others, but as I've said many times already, the best way for you to run is the way your body wants to run. And if your body prefers a heel first landing, that's what's right for you. And in any case, the Kayano's 2mm reduction in offset isn't going to fundamentally change the way your foot hits the ground. Yet by slightly lowering the angle of your foot at initial contact, it could promote a smoother transition from contact into mid-stance. So that's one potential benefit of the Kayano 32's lower offset. Another is that, like the Hoka Mach 6, the way ASICS achieves this lower offset is by adding more foam under the ball of your foot. We'll talk about how that influences cushioning in just a minute, but that added height up front gave ASICS the headroom to incorporate an early stage forefoot rocker, as you can see here. And as with the Mach 6, throughout my testing, the Kayano's rocker mitigated any potential increase in Achilles loading associated with its lower offset. I found that it also just promoted a really nice, smooth toe off. Okay, so when it comes to our loss of tendon elasticity, I think that even with its slightly lowered heel ball offset, the Kayano 32 is going to work well for most runners over 50. Now, how about cushioning? Again, like the Hoka Mach 6, the midsole of the Kayano 32 is made of an EVA-based foam, which some might criticize as old hat. But ASICS has developed a proprietary blend to my feet is in the Goldilocks zone. It takes the edge off of impacts without feeling mushy and is responsive without feeling like you have to run faster than you want to get the most out of it. And I think a wide range of runners will enjoy it. I should note here too that the GEL-Kayano 32's foam midsole is augmented with a small gel insert under the heel. I really have to applaud ASICS for moving away from the large, visible gel units that used to be the defining feature of their shoes, as was the case with the Kayano 16. These gel units may have been eye-catching, but they added a lot of weight and significantly compromised ride quality. So a big thank you to the folks at ASICS who are willing to prioritize performance over shiny doodads. Sticking with cushioning, but moving on to stack height, the Kayano 32 sits at 40mm under the heel, which is right at that 40mm ceiling for maintaining balance and stability. Stack at the forefoot comes in at 32mm, matching the Hoka Mach 6 and towering over the Brooks Go 17. If you value buku cushioning at the heel and forefoot, but won't stand for a shoe that feels tippy, the Kayano 32 should absolutely be on your short list of shoes to try. That brings us to fit, and the Kayano 32 shines here as well. It's offered in up to 3 widths for men, specifically standard, wide, and extra wide, and up to 3 widths for women, specifically narrow, standard, and wide. So I think even folks with specific foot issues like bunions will be able to find the size and width that fits. As for arch feel, you could see the Kayano 32 stays wide through the midfoot with minimal wasting. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that the shoe does feature a chunk of gray foam under the arch, which might seem antithetical to the whole 4D guidance concept. But this is one of the coolest aspects of the shoe, because this gray foam is no longer harder than the white foam surrounding it. It's actually softer and more resilient. The idea here is that the softness of this gray foam will allow your foot to pronate through its natural range of motion. But if that pronation starts to become exaggerated, the resilience of the foam will limit the duration of that pronation so that your foot can resupinate as it must for an efficient toe off. So again, a 180 from the classic pronation blocking approach to stability that had defined the Kayano for decades. Now, in all honesty, I don't have the means to quantify whether or not this specific feature actually does anything, but I can say that the Kayano 32 offers a perceptible sensation of support under the arch without ever feeling overly controlling. And I had no issues with arch, foot, Achilles, or any other kind of pain over the course of the 38 miles I logged in the shoe. One other thing I want to highlight when it comes to arch feel is a feature that bowled me over when I discovered it. Like many running shoes these days, the Kayano 32 incorporates straps of material that attach its tongue to the footbed. Typically, the purpose of these straps is to prevent the tongue from shifting too far to one side or the other while running. But in the case of the Kayano, the straps along the arch, the strap along the arch side has a secondary purpose. Now, first I'll show you how these straps are usually attached to the footbed using the Hoka Mach 6. I've already removed its laces, so hopefully this is a little bit easier to illustrate. And taking out its sock liner, you can see the footbed, which is white here. This component that makes up the footbed is called a strobel. And you can see that along both sides of the foot, the straps that make up the tongue are attached to the footbed at that strobel. Right? So now if we look at the Kayano, and here its footbed, its strobel is blue. And you can see that the strap on the lateral side, or pinky toe side, is captured along the strobel, just like the Mach 6. But if we look at the arch side, you can see that the strap there is instead attached on top of the strobel, about 1 centimeter inboard of the seam where the upper and strobel meet. The key thing here is that by wrapping under the foot, as opposed to being stitched onto the base of the footbed, the strap can actually support from under the arch, rather than just pushing from the side of the foot. It's a beautifully elegant solution that's very unusual because it's very challenging to execute. And I know that because I was the product manager on a shoe that featured a similar concept, the Nike Lunar Glide 3 that was released back in 2011. It might seem really simple, just change where you stitch down the strap, right? But it's actually very challenging to execute something like this at scale, at the scale at which all of the brands in this guide operate, because it requires a non-trivial change in the manufacturing process for the upper. As to why ASICS did it, I take it as another expression of their 4D guidance concept, and particularly the part where they talk about providing optimum stability and enhanced comfort when a runner needs it most. And that's the beauty of this arch strap in the Kayano 32. If you don't need it, you won't feel a thing. But say you start to get fatigued over the course of a long run and your arch starts to collapse, the strap will be there to take on that load as you need it. And in case anyone's wondering, you don't feel that seam where the arch strap is stitched into the strobel. Not at all. That's partly because the strap is recessed into the material of the strobel. And it's also because the Kayano 32 features a sock liner that's roughly 30% thicker than average, just like the Brooks Go 17. In addition to providing great step-in feel, the thickness of the Kayano's stock insert allows the shoe to accommodate a wide range of aftermarket orthotics without compromising fit. All right, how about value? At an MSRP of $165 in the US, the Kayano 32 is getting up there in price. But if you're a runner over 50 who values support in a shoe with the versatility to cover a wide range of runs and the cushioning to keep you feeling good over pretty much any distance, I don't think there's a better option out there today than the ASICS GEL-Kayano 32. Oh, and as for hallux rigidus, with the range of widths that the Kayano 32 is available in, combined with its relatively stiff forefoot and pronounced early stage rocker, I think it's a great choice for runners with big toe stiffness. So all of that combined is why I say the ASICS GEL-Kayano 32 is like Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. Seemingly stodgy at first glance, but beneath the surface, a devoted protector who contains multitudes. With the softer gray foam under the arch, the shoe gained my admiration, and with the beautifully elegant execution of its arch strap, it gained my love. That brings us to the last shoe in our guide, the Nike Vomero Plus, which retails for $180 US. In one sentence, the Vomero Plus is truly, definitively plush. Now, cushioning is a word that's used a lot in marketing for running footwear, and you'll often hear adjectives like smooth, soft, and plush used to describe the ride experience a shoe promises to deliver. But more often than not, the reality of what you get doesn't live up to the hype. Well, in the case of the Vomero Plus, I can tell you that the hype is real. And even though it's the most expensive shoe in this guide, I'd argue that it actually over-delivers and sets the benchmark for max cushion daily trainers. Let's start with what makes the Vomero Plus the least familiar option here, which is going to require me to change up the order in which I've been talking through these reviews. Because, perhaps unsurprisingly, what really sets the Vomero Plus apart is its cushioning. As you can see, the design of the shoe, which emphasizes its big, thick midsole, clearly promises heaps of cushioning. And I can tell you that what you see is what you get. The cushioning feel provided by the Vomero Plus truly is soft, plush, and pillowy. Part of this is due to the shoe's gargantuan stack. In a US men's size 9, Running Warehouse measures the heel stack at 43 millimeters, making the Vomero Plus the tallest shoe in this guide. But credit is also due to the foam that makes up most of that stack. Unlike its peers in this guide, all of which rely on various blends of that old reliable EVA foam, the Vomero Plus makes use of a more advanced, higher performance chemistry. And the result is a midsole that's very compressible, which is what makes it feel soft, very responsive, which is what makes it feel springy, and surprisingly light. Don't get me wrong, the Vomero Plus isn't a featherweight, but it's much lighter than you'd expect it to be, given the size of its midsole. This blend of soft and springy with relatively light weight is why I think the Vomero Plus will suit a wide range of runners when it comes to cushioning feel. Whether you're light or heavy, you should be able to engage the shoe's midsole foam. But what about the issue of balance? With a stack of 43 millimeters under the heel, the Vomero Plus exceeds that 40 millimeter threshold for maintaining balance and stability we've talked about. And there's no denying it feels like a tall shoe. But I think Nike's done a good job mitigating the stability issues that stem from so much stack, largely through the shape of the shoe's midsole. First, it's very wide along its base, across the forefoot, midfoot, and heel. And this ring of outsole material adds stiffness along the midsole's perimeter, further enhancing edge-to-edge stability. Second, the Vomero Plus features very high sidewalls that help to contain and stabilize the heel while walking and running. This part of the midsole that you can see all around the shoe is called the sidewall because it's a vertical wall that represents the side of the midsole all along its perimeter. In the early days, when midsoles were made of sheets of foam, the sidewall represented both the visible and actual height of the midsole. But nowadays, in many running shoes, the sidewalls of the midsole wrap high up alongside your foot, much higher than the part of the midsole that your foot is actually sitting on. For example, if we were to cut the Vomero Plus in half along its length, you'd see that the sidewalls extend well above the center height of the midsole under your heel. And the reason shoemakers do this is to cradle and stabilize your heel while you're loading the midsole. The combination of these raised sidewalls with a wide base of support helps to counteract the inherent instability of a midsole that's as tall and soft as what you get in the Vomero Plus. It's not a shoe I would recommend to anyone who already has balance concerns, but I can say that over the course of my 33 miles of testing, the shoe felt much more sure-footed than I expected it to. Okay, so when it comes to cushioning and heel stack, the Vomero Plus is going to be the least familiar shoe in this guide for most runners. And yet, when it comes to features with implications for our Achilles tendon, you could almost describe the shoe as old school. Let's start with the heel ball offset. As I mentioned a minute ago, the heel stack of the Vomero Plus is the tallest in this guide, which definitely sets it apart. But for most new and new-ish runners over 50, the shoe's classic heel ball offset of 10 millimeters is going to feel very familiar. This relatively high offset also means that as tall as the shoe is under the heel, the forefoot of the Vomero Plus is just barely taller than what you get in the Hoka Mach 6 and ASICS GEL-Kayano 32. So kind of an underfoot experience version of business in the front, party in the back.
Business at the front, party at the back. It's easy to maintain. It's not a hairstyle, it's a lifestyle.
Speaking of the front, the Vomero Plus does feature a pronounced forefoot rocker, as you can see here. I will say that I wish the forefoot rocker came on a bit earlier than it does. To my feet at least, the transition through toe-off was not quite as smooth or effortless as I found it to be in the Mach 6 and Kayano 32, both of which feature early stage rockers. On the flip side, the somewhat later stage rocker in the Vomero Plus will feel more natural when standing and walking. All in all, when it comes to our loss of tendon elasticity, I found the Vomero Plus to be a net positive. Its classic heel ball offset is going to align with the preferences of many runners over 50, and its pronounced forefoot rocker, while perhaps not as optimal for running as the rockers in the Hoka Mach 6 and ASICS GEL-Kayano 32, could help reduce loading on the Achilles tendon. All right, moving on to fit. As I noted in my review of the Brooks Go 17, our tendency toward paradoxical preference when it comes to fit kind of renders any commentary about it moot. But for what it's worth, to my feet, the Vomero Plus offered the most accommodating fit of any of the shoes in this guide, all of which I tested in a medium or regular width. And if you need more interior volume, the Vomero Plus is offered in extra wide and select colorways for both men and women. The fact that it's available in multiple widths, combined with its pronounced rocker and relatively stiff forefoot, should be a boon for folks with bunions and those with big toe stiffness. In terms of arch feel, the Vomero Plus, with its broad base along the length of the arch, provides a level of support that's going to work for a lot of runners. The support doesn't feel as overt as it does in the Kayano 32, so that shoe will be the better option if you prefer a more support-forward experience. But if you want something that feels neutral, yet won't allow exaggerated collapse of the arch, the Vomero Plus is a great choice. The only watch out I'll offer is that I've seen quite a few reports documenting failures of the shoe's cable-based lacing system. As you can see in these images, the cable-based eye stays can break away. My impression is that most of these failures occurred in the first couple of months following the shoe's release in August and have tapered off since then, which could mean that Nike has resolved the underlying issue. This kind of midstream fix after a shoe's already been released is called a running change. And while not common, it does happen. Fortunately, I haven't experienced this issue with my pair, at least not yet. But if you do, you can at least take solace in the knowledge that Nike does offer a generous return policy. I'll include a link in the description to their warranty FAQ. Now, it might seem a bit funky to segue into a discussion about value right after highlighting a potentially widespread defect in the shoe that retails for $180. But such is the uniqueness of the experience that the Vomero Plus provides that I stand by the statement I made at the start of this review that even though it's the most expensive shoe in this guide, the Vomero Plus actually over-delivers and sets the benchmark for max cushion daily trainers. I don't know of any other shoe on the market today that can match, let alone surpass, the blend of pillowy cushioning and versatility across run types offered by the Vomero Plus. That doesn't mean it's for everyone. For example, the Vomero Plus isn't my personal favorite amongst the shoes in this guide. It's just more shoe than I prefer. But for the runners over 50 who do want the most cushioning you can get, the Vomero Plus absolutely belongs on your short list of shoes to try, because it is truly, definitively plush. All right, so these are the 4 shoes that we recommend for new and new-ish runners over 50, circa early 2026. I'll lay them out for you in order from most to least familiar, starting with the Brooks Ghost 17, which is the best choice for folks who prefer a relatively firm feel underfoot and want a shoe that will work as well in the gym as it does on the run. That's why we're calling it the versatility champ. Then there's the Hoka Mach 6, the lightest and most affordable shoe in this guide, that provides a go-fast feel without compromising protection. Its smile-inducing ride is why we call it the Mazda Miata of running shoes. Just be aware of its low heel ball offset and relatively narrow fit. Next is the ASICS GEL-Kayano 32, aka Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, who may seem stodgy at first glance, but beneath the surface is a devoted protector who contains multitude. The Kayano provides the most support-forward feel in this guide and is, to me, the most balanced option. As a shoe geek, I also have to recognize the Kayano 32 as the most beautifully crafted shoe I've run in over the past year. The shaping of its upper is just chef's kiss. If in doubt, this is the shoe I'd try first. Finally, we have the Nike Vomero Plus, which in both appearance and performance is likely to be the least familiar for runners over 50. Unlike a lot of shoes that make big promises when it comes to cushioning, the Vomero Plus is truly definitively plush. That makes it the best choice for runners seeking the softest ride. But be aware that it's also the tallest shoe here and isn't the best choice for folks with balance concerns. Feel free to screen grab this chart for future reference. It's also available as a downloadable PDF for members of our Patreon community. See our Patreon link in the description below. Now, I've described these as our picks for new runners over 50, but they're not quote-unquote beginner models. First and foremost, they're fantastic running shoes, and it just so happens that based on the criteria we've articulated, they're also great choices for runners who are getting started. Any of these picks could remain your go-to running shoe for years to come. The last thing I'll say in this section is a reiteration of advice I shared earlier. Please view these recommendations as starting points. My intention is not to have you go to your local running store and only try on these 4 shoes. Instead, pick the 1 or 2 that seem to best align to your needs and preferences and start there. If at all possible, take them for a brief jog. Most running stores will be happy to let you do that, or we'll have a treadmill in the store so you can give them a go indoors. Consider how you feel about those shoes and share your thoughts with the store associate. It's more than likely they'll be able to suggest 2 or 3 additional models worth trying, and that could lead you to an even better match for your needs. My goal here isn't to persuade you that my recommendations are correct. Instead, it's to give you a shortcut on your journey to becoming a happy, healthy, and committed runner over 50. Shoes can play a big role in that journey, so I sincerely hope this guide shortens your path to finding a shoe you love. Now, I'm willing to bet that there's someone in the comments who's already written an all caps rant to the effect of, how the bleep can you leave out insert shoe name here? I'm sure I'll still get plenty of comments to that effect, but I'm going to attempt to preempt at least some of them by speaking to why I've excluded several shoes that are very popular amongst running influencers and in some cases the broader running public. And the first shoe I have to speak to is the Adidas Adizero Evo SL. This may look familiar. I referenced it while discussing the Brooks Ghost 17. And if you've done any research on running shoes, particularly on YouTube, you've undoubtedly come across at least one video extolling the virtues of the Evo SL as a do-it-all shoe for beginners to veteran runners alike. Thanks to the truly high-performance foam that makes up its midsole and the absolutely masterful shaping of that midsole, the Evo SL is a blast to run fast in. And at $150 US, it's a uniquely good deal given the technology you're getting. And yet, I wouldn't recommend the Evo SL as a daily trainer to new runners in their 20s, let alone new runners in their 50s. The shaping of the midsole I just mentioned does give the shoe a lot of pace, but this is a Faustian bargain because that pace is made possible by significantly loading your Achilles tendon and calf muscles. And most new runners are not going to have the capacity in their calf complex to tolerate those elevated loads over any meaningful distance. For runners over 50, the risks are particularly pronounced given our predisposition to Achilles injuries. If you're an experienced runner with high capacity in your lower legs, the Evo SL can be a fantastic shoe for a range of runs. Or say you're starting to incorporate short tempo runs into your overall training mix. The Evo SL could be a great complement to your existing daily trainer for those faster, relatively low volume days. But if you're a newer runner, and especially a newer runner over 50, I cannot recommend the Adidas Adizero Evo SL as your one everyday running shoe. If you're over 50 and crave a daily trainer with a go fast feel, I'd recommend the Hoka Mach 6 instead, which is highlighted in the pick section. For my next attempt to preempt the litany of all caps comments, I'll explain why I didn't include the ASICS Novablast 5. The Novablast 5 is an enormously popular shoe, and not just amongst shoe influencers. A global fitness platform called Strava, with over 180 million users around the world, reported that in 2025, the Novablast 5 was the top running shoe on their platform. And unlike the Evo SL, which Adidas markets as a lightweight shoe for speed, the ASICS Novablast 5 is positioned as a daily trainer. So why wasn't it amongst our recommendations? Well, you remember when I talked about the shift in mindset in the running footwear industry away from the idea that shoes should try to control the way you run and to the philosophy that shoes should allow you to run the way your body wants to? I also mentioned the critical corollary, which is that the brands also recognize that a shoe should not exaggerate your innate pronation or overarching way of moving. So in a nutshell, don't try to control the foot and don't exaggerate its innate motions. In the case of the ASICS Novablast 5, I believe it falls short on that second point, at least for many runners over 50. For younger runners, I think the Novablast 5 could be a great choice as a daily trainer. And on paper, at least, it looks fantastic for older runners too. It offers lots of cushioning, a moderate heel ball offset with a pronounced forefoot rocker, and an accommodating fit, all in a shoe that retails for $150. But to my feet, the softness of the Novablast midsole foam and the shaping of that midsole create a tendency to exaggerate the motions of the foot, including the collapse of the arch and by extension pronation. If you're young and have a biomechanically efficient gait, this will be a non-issue. But for us runners over 50 who have, in many cases, accumulated a variety of, let's say, quirks in our gait, this tendency toward exaggerated motion could increase our risk of a range of chronic running-related injuries. And that's why the Novablast 5 is not amongst our recommended models. If the Novablast 5 sounds appealing, the alternative I'd suggest is actually from ASICS as well. The GEL-Kayano 32, which is comparable in a lot of ways, but provides a much more supportive ride. Jump back to our review in the pick section for more details. For my final why didn't we, I'm actually going to address a category rather than a single shoe. And that category is foot-shaped running shoes that feature very wide toe boxes. You may remember the old Vibram Five Fingers that took the concept of a foot-shaped shoe perhaps a bit too literally. Well, in recent years, brands like Ultra and Topo have seen huge growth by offering a more approachable take on this idea. Using the Ultra Experience Flow 3 that I have here as an example, you can see that its toe box is almost rectangular. And more closely approximates the shape of the foot. Compare that to, say, the Brooks Ghost 17, which features a more conventionally tapered toe box that reaches its apex at the center line of the foot, rather than ahead of the big toe, as is the case in the Ultra. A lot of older folks are gravitating to shoes from brands like Ultra and Topo for walking and everyday wear, because their more foot-shaped toe boxes offer a lot more volume up front. So if that's the case, why aren't there any foot-shaped shoes in our recommendations? Well, the issue is that these brands like Ultra and Topo were founded on the belief that what's natural is always best. As such, not only do they feature foot-shaped uppers, they also started out with a commitment to low-profile midsoles with minimal cushioning and very low heel ball offsets. In the case of Ultra, a 0 heel ball offset. Recently, both brands have shown a willingness to compromise on this dogma when it comes to cushioning, with Ultra and Topo now offering shoes with high to very high stack heights. Similarly, when it comes to offsets, Ultra, which had been founded on a commitment to what they called zero drop footbeds, began introducing models with non-zero offsets in 2023, and the Experience Flow is an example of that. And yet, on the whole, their shoes still tend to be firmer than average, and all still feature heel ball offsets lower than what many of us folks over 50 are going to be accustomed to. As I touched on earlier, this is a classic case of what's natural not necessarily being what's normal for most of us. Yes, zero drop is natural. That's how we're all born. But if you've lived for over 5 decades wearing shoes built on 10 millimeter or higher offsets, suddenly shifting down to a 0 or even a low heel ball offset is not going to be normal for you. And trying to run in that shoe is almost certain to increase your risk of injury. If you're already accustomed to footwear with low to 0 offsets, these sorts of shoes are absolutely worth considering. But given that most people over 50 aren't, and given that many of us will benefit from increased cushioning, I can't recommend any of these existing foot-shaped models as a daily trainer for new runners over 50. For walking, I think they could be great, but I wouldn't recommend them for running. If you find that you need a wider toe box, remember that all of the shoes we've recommended are available in at least one additional width on top of medium, with the Kayano 32 available in up to 3 widths and the Ghost 17 in up to 4. The bottom line is that you don't need to compromise on cushioning feel or Achilles loading to get a wide toe box. Okay, well, I hope that helps to at least somewhat calm the ire of anyone who might have felt aggrieved by my exclusion of a particular shoe. The key points to bear in mind here are that the recommendations in this guide are for a specific audience, namely new runners over 50, and for specific use, namely as a versatile daily trainer. Still, that said, if you think I've missed a shoe that merits inclusion, absolutely do share it in the comments. I just ask that you please do so with civility. All right, so that's the We Run Over 50 guide to shoes for new runners over 50, circa early 2026. I very much hope you found this guide useful, especially if you're a new or perhaps even aspiring runner. I know that this sport can be incredibly daunting for newcomers. It's full of jargon, gatekeepers, and advice so contradictory it can make your head spin. And on top of all that, with pretty much every brand fixated on younger runners, it can sometimes feel like us folks over 50 aren't particularly welcome. Well, I'm here to tell you that you are. And if you do just a bit of digging, you'll find an incredibly vibrant community of runners over 50 who want nothing more than to grow our ranks. Because we know firsthand how profound the benefits of running can be for our physical and mental well-being. To paraphrase my favorite expression, the best time to start running was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And I hope that with this video, I've given you the nudge you needed to make that start. Or maybe you're not over 50, but know someone who is and might appreciate this video. If so, please do share it with them. Sharing and liking will let YouTube know that there is an audience of, let's say, mature folks out there who are hungry for content like this. And if you want to see more from us, please do subscribe. Or better yet, join our community of like-minded people over 50 who are becoming runners over 50 over on Patreon. I've included a link in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and happy running.